what a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Hello guys, welcome back to another video. I know it's been basically 6 weeks since my last upload, but I've been busy doing other stuff, and also Cards has been particularly interesting to me after the expansion dropped. I had quite a bit of fun for a couple of weeks, but the meta set in real fast and kind of got a bit stale, especially after the expansion tournament was played. And I'm sure that that is not only the case just for me. I'm sure that a lot of you have experienced something similar. But fortunately, the video that I've come back here today to record right now is talking about the upcoming fall release for Cards, which is Air Supremacy. It is going to be a mini expansion themed all around aircraft, bombers, fighters, all things air related, which is interesting. And we have seen this style of expansion once before with the... I'm blanking on the name of it, but the one that focused on the Allied Nations, United Front, where it was all Allied Nation cards. This one is going to be primarily main nation cards, so it is going to affect the whole meta a bit more, hopefully, than United Front did. And yeah, that's sort of what we're talking about. The Air Supremacy is coming out. There are a few cards here that have already been revealed, and in total, it's going to be, I believe they say the total number of cards here somewhere, 19 new cards. So each main nation is getting an elite, a special, and a limited, and then each ally nation is going to get a limited. So, 5 times 3, 15 plus a limited for each of the 4 ally nations, 19 new cards. So 19 does not sound like a lot, but there's quite a few different decks, especially air-related, that don't need to be pushed that hard to really start to see some serious play, or at least be worth looking at. Like the Brewster's archetype for US air is quite powerful. If like a bit underutilized, Germany has a lot of really powerful air units that don't necessarily have a ton of synergy with each other, but if they got more cards to get synergy with each other, Britain Air is always like one good card away from dominating the meta again. Soviets have gotten a lot of support for air. Same with Japan has had a lot of powerful support for air. So really, all 5 nations could theoretically get an air deck out of this expansion with just 1 or 2 good cards, and they're all getting 3 cards, so hopefully they are all good. And you can expect the power level of the 19 cards, like the average power level across the 19 cards, to be much higher than the average power level in like the 80 to 100 card expansions, just because there's fewer of them and they want it to have a similar effect on the meta. So hopefully this is going to shake things up. But we're not talking about the cards from Air Supremacy just yet. That'll be a different video coming soon, because this expansion comes out mid to late September. Exact date TBA. But alongside this, there is 15 cards entering, or 15 cards returning from the reserve pool, 33 cards being rotated out, as well as there's going to be a balance patch, which is going to be August 28th. So this video, we are going to look at all of the cards that are being rotated out, we are looking at all of the cards that are coming back, and then we are looking at all of the balance changes that are going to be coming out before the expansion. So there's going to be a brief time where the balance patch hits, but the rotation hasn't hit yet, and the new cards aren't out yet. So that's going to be a micro meta there of some variety. But this is, interesting, so let's talk about it. And let's first look at the reserved cards, because, honestly, the balance patch is going to be... like, actual card changes is as much of a tool for balancing as the reserve pool is. So you can't look at just one and then see how, say like, oh, this deck wasn't nerfed. Well, it might not be that the cards in the deck were changed, but it might have lost cards to the reserve pool, or like the counter gained cards from the reserve pool. So we're going to start by looking at the reserve pool, where each nation is losing, let's see if I can do some quick math here, I believe 5 cards, 6 cards, something like that. I believe each nation is losing 6 cards. So let's take a look at the cards for Britain. So they're losing the 3rd Canadian Division. This card is sad because there's quite a lot of J. King memes about this, because obviously it's the Canadian division, the third 3-time. But yeah, outside of people using this for memes, nobody really played this card. Not because it's bad, a 4K 4/5 guard with salvage, and then additional upside on top of that is fine. It's just, you're not running fine cards in meta decks, you're running great cards in meta decks. So moving on, we have the Typhoon, which is just a card that was always close to being powerful. Like 4 credit for a 5/4 fighter, decent body, and the upside is incredible because it offers potentially infinite card draw. Like, it's a card draw which can trigger as many times as you want. It's not just a draw one. So, you know, if this draws a single card, it's already much better than the FW, which saw continuous play. The issue is, it's just very difficult to retreat things consistently. The only mass AoE retreats that are cheap, especially in Britain, were delaying tactics, and not every deck's taking the front line, so Typhoon never really saw any play. It is a bit weird to see Typhoon being rotated in an air expansion, but Britain just has so many air units that, like, you know, it's fine to lose some. Desert Raid is being lost as well. Desert Raid is a card that just never really saw play, and I don't think people really thought it was going to be good. So you look at the card and read the text. All units deal 1 combat damage until your next turn. And you think, oh, this is like an incredible stall tool. It's not quite 2 credits pin all enemy units, but it's 2 credits and, like, units can't hit your HQ for more than 1 at a time. It's like a national fire service, but you don't have to trigger the countermeasure. Unfortunately, hitting the HQ does not count as combat damage, so you play Desert Raid and then they just throw everything into the HQ because unit trading is useless. And, like, theoretically, if you get a guard set up and then play Desert Raid, then if they can't hit your HQ through the guard, but also they're probably just going to remove the guard, because that's how people get the guards ended most of the time anyways. So, yeah, Desert Raid just never was a good card. Aerial Reconnaissance would be a very substantial hit if they hadn't nerfed it, and the nerf happened semi-recently, and it was to reduce cards to a minimum of 1, so you can't get 0 credit orders. And the primary types of decks that would want to use Aerial Reconnaissance are the types of decks that want 0 credit orders. They're trying to reduce things from 1 to 0, and you can't do that anyways, so nobody was playing this card, so not a big hit. Against the odds being lost, again, this is a card I tried to test out so much, because in theory, it's 0 credits, replace itself in your hand, so it doesn't cost anything to use, and it replaces itself, and it pins a unit. So it just looks great, but unfortunately, the reality is it's not great, because the unit attack goes through anyway, so you're not stopping it from attacking things, so if they're trying to trade into a unit, it doesn't really do much. And also, sometimes they realize you have this after the first one triggers, so then they won't attack with, like, small units, and then this gets stuck in your hand, and it's, like, being filled up, or, like, you're playing against a ramp deck, and they spend several turns ramping when your hand's stuck with against the odds, and you want to find something else. So, never really saw play. Merchant Navy is another countermeasure. This one, being rotated, is actually kind of weird because it was recently, I believe it was recently brought back, because this card used to be absolutely terrible, one of the worst cards in the game, and then they brought it back and changed it to when an enemy unit attacks, retreat it instead for 2 credit countermeasure. That's decent. It did not see play, but it was decent and it was new, and now it's gone again. So, yeah, they seem to be getting rid of a few countermeasures here. And then we lose a French card. This is the only French card being rotated, and it is the second Rima, or the deuxième Rima. And Rima is a card that actually saw quite a lot of play, and then it was nerfed, and it continued to see a decent amount of play after the nerf. The issue is board-based French control decks have not been around for at least 2 years, and there's no sign that they are going to be coming back. So, personally, I was a fan of those types of decks, so it's a little sad to see Rima go, but again, not really going to have much of an impact on the meta. So let's go down and then back across. So Italy is losing Lion for a day, and this is by far the most impactful card that we've seen so far. Like, France lost absolutely nothing. Britain lost absolutely nothing. Italy loses a single card and is Lion for a day. Now, obviously, Dago Strikes has risen in popularity, and Decima got recently buffed, so Decima is sort of back and being very, very powerful. So it's not like Italy is left with no control tools, but this definitely is a hit to the total Italy control package, which is probably fine. I mean, the number one ally for Italy was Soviets, and Soviets have all sorts of removal options, so I don't think the Soviet Italy decks are going to be too broken up about the loss for Lion for a Day. I honestly think this hits the Japanese Italy deck a bit more, which is a little sad, but again, just slowly removing cards, just powerful cards from the pool, allows room for new cards to see play, allows room for new decks to see play. So Lion for a Day is a good change, and again, probably the most impactful change. 33 Panzer Grenadiers is being rotated, and this one again is actually relatively impactful. It's not seen a ton of play now, but people really realized how powerful this card was since the buff around the Blood and Iron expansion, a little bit before Blood and Iron, when there's a lot of the German-Finnish aggro tank decks going around before the big nerf to Doctrine, the Blitz Doctrine. And 33 Panzer Grenadier, just a very solid card in that deck. Now, obviously, that deck's not been popular for a hot minute here, but 33 Panzer Grenadiers was still seeing some play in the deck, so it's a relevant change, or relevant loss. And then we have the 39th Panzer Grenadiers, probably the least relevant Panzer Grenadier unit in the game, and that's kind of saying a lot. And yeah, 39 Panzer Grenadiers, very interesting concept. It swaps positions with a friendly unit on the board, gets +2 attack in the front line. Unfortunately, this card is absolute trash, so nobody ever played it. It's not going to be lost. JU87B2. When they changed dive bombing to be much better, I briefly thought about trying out this card. I think I might have played it for like 10 or 20 games on ladder. The issue is it is not good. You would rather just run dive bombing in your deck so you could play it on turn 1 against Jaggro, rather than run a bad unit to give you dive bombing later in the game. Again, a little weird that we're seeing this be rotated in an air-themed expansion instead of, say, buffed, but again, nobody's really going to play it. Then we get to a slightly more relevant change. Panther A is finally being rotated. This card has been around since Allegiance, and it has gone through a few different iterations. And honestly, this card was rather game-warping on 2 separate occasions. In its current version, it has never been game-warping at all. There's some handlock decks that try to play it, myself included. I really like trying to fit this card into your deck. It never makes your deck better, but it makes your deck more fun to play. But this card comes off of the Contest Doctrine fairly regularly. It's one of the big tanks. It is 5 credit for 5/5 heavy armor 1. That's not bad, and it has upside. So oftentimes the more aggressive decks will pick Panther A off of Contest Doctrine just because you can play it at down cheaper than like a King Tiger or a Panzerzug or something like that. So this is a small hit, I think, in total to the Contest Doctrine pool. Then Germany is also losing Maelstrom, which is, if you've seen a Germany-France mill deck on ladder, it's rather popular. Not particularly good, but it's seen some play on ladder. That deck is running a lot of Maelstroms just because it is a expensive AoE, so if you're playing a big control deck, lots of healing, lots of removal, you're going to be running Maelstroms. In terms of like actual competitive tier 1 decks, this does not matter at all because nobody ran Maelstrom before, and now they have Capitulation, so there's not really a world where Maelstrom was going to be particularly relevant. So this is kind of just like, it's kind of weird. So far, like, the main 2 things hit by rotation are, like, the German aggro tank deck, which no one cares about, and then, like, obscure control. Hopefully we'll see some bigger hits. Speaking of bigger hits, Panther D is rotated. This one I am just honestly happy to see gone, because this card was so frustrating when people would pull it off of Contest Doctrine. Like, you're just playing a normal game, they slam down, like, an 8/7 Panther D because it's +1/+1 from Contest Doctrine, and then it's just, like, an immediate, do you have removal for this? 80% of the time, yes, but, like, 20% of the time you're going to lose to a randomly generated card in a game you were otherwise winning 100% of the time, and that is very, very frustrating. So yeah, I'm happy to no longer be getting hit for, like, 16 by Panther D from a Jaguar who is otherwise out of cards. Then, speaking of Jaguar, let's go down to Japan. Japan's elite they are losing is Home Defense. Again, just going for the obscure control. I've not seen a lot of hits to anything that's actually relevant. I'm not sure a tier 2 deck has lost a card yet. Losing On the Horizon, which is a card which is, in theory, very powerful, but there's definitely been quite the deck that wanted to play it. So on the horizon is this turn your units are immune to damage and cannot attack the enemy HQ. So essentially what you're supposed to use this card is for 1 credit, you throw it out, and then you trade down your opponent's entire board without losing any of your units. The problem is there's just not that much all-at-once unit-on-unit trading in Cards, and there really hasn't been for years and years and years. There is unit trading, don't get me wrong, but it is like on-curve units trading out for the first like 4 or 5 turns. And then after that, it's like sometimes you sack a bunch of stuff into a big guy, maybe, and on the horizon's fine in that situation, but that's like if you're playing against specifically Britain or Soviets. Any other deck doesn't have guards, and all your guys are just going face, because you have the front line if you're an aggro deck, and if you don't have the front line, you're probably losing the game and don't have the units to play this, play on the horizon, like play all the units, play on the horizon, trade out the front line, and then you're out of cards in hand and all your units are in the front line and your opponent has the resources that were gained from controlling the front line for so long. And yeah, this card, it just didn't really see play. Now we get onto something actually relevant. Type 94 TK early is being rotated, and may it never come back like the Bicycle Regiment. So Type 94 TK early has been a staple in almost every Japan deck, basically since it came out. It was clearly printed to be a pushed card. I think at the time that Type 94 TK early came out, Jagro had lost a lot of stuff to rotation, and it was sort of in like a tier 2 bordering tier 3 territory. Type 94 TK early came out, other cards came out as well, other things got rotated and nerfed and whatnot, and Jagro sort of came back in full force and has been, in one form or another, a very solid tournament-worthy deck off the back of Type 94 TK early for quite some time. And it being rotated is very good. Now, in terms of the decks it hits currently in the meta, it hits the 2 Japanese decks, which are Japan-Poland Legions and Japan-Soviet Aggro. Now, the Japan-Soviet Aggro definitely runs 2 copies of Type 94. The Japan-Poland Legions, most of them run Type 94 because it's just that good of a unit, and many of them run 2, 3, sometimes 4 copies of expansion on top of the Legion stuff. I have seen some people's Legions builds go a bit more controlling and not run Type 94 just because it is a little low on, like, its sort of card impact. It's on its own, it's not going to do a lot for you unless your strategy is burn your opponent down quickly, and if you're playing a more control-oriented Japan-Poland Legions, your goal is probably not to burn down your opponent particularly quickly. But yeah, this is a hit to the decks. Now, I will say, I think Japan has a wealth of one-cost options in the game right now, with the Type 90, or the 33rd Recon, Sasebo for your draws, the Cavalry Regiment for your 1k 0-op blitzers. Obviously, if you're a Soviet ally, you're running it with Kolm, which is 4 more 1k 0-op blitzers. Then you're also running the, I always forget the name of it, but the 1-credit shock guy. That guy's incredibly powerful, especially at countering Japan-Soviet aggro. So yeah, Japan is not going to like suddenly have a shortage of aggressive one-cost units to play. Type 94, though, was a masterclass in pushing damage to the HQ, and now it is gone and may it ever come back. The B69 Tenzan. This card, it has a very powerful deployment effect, which is pin a target enemy unit. If it is already pinned, destroy it instead for 5 credit 3/3 bomber. Issue is Japan never really had a good control deck, and if it did, it would not be around pinning things, and then also running expensive for low stat bombers to finish off the things you have already spent a different card to pin. I mean, people played it in pin decks, but pin decks were never that good. But again, it is a fighter leaving before air supremacy. A little bit weird. Then we get to 56th Recon, and this one is a huge one because it is a massive hit to the Legions deck, which is not the most popular deck in tournament, actually. If you watched the most recent expansion tournament, obviously Legions very popular on ladder before the tournament was played, very popular on ladder after the tournament was played. But in the tournament, all of the Japan players tended to lean into the Japan-Soviet aggro, and that worked out very, very well for them. The Legions players, like, if you just look at the statistics of who brought Legions, who brought Japan-Soviet aggro, Japan-Soviet aggro drastically overperformed Legions in that tournament. But that being said, it was still a very, very popular deck on ladder. In my experience, it is probably, like, at any given time, the first or second most popular deck on ladder. And 56th Recon is a big part of that because it is a 1-credit intel enabler. So just already 1 credit to trigger your intel stuff is very, very good. And that 1 credit comes with a body, which is very, very good. But also, that body, destruction deal 1 damage to each enemy unit, is very powerful for a couple of reasons. One, you were able to destroy that on your own turn in a couple different ways. Some decks even ran Out of the Mist, so you could Out of the Mist the recon, trigger the destruction effect, and then replay it as an additional 1 credit intel. But like, even then, even if you're not trading it off and you deal 1 damage to each enemy unit, which is always good, but specifically if you're playing against like an aggro deck, and Japan Soviet aggro is very, very popular, and Commandos, very, very popular, not necessarily an aggro deck, but lots of 1 health units, 56th Recon could be a menace. But also, you could play it on turn 1 and counter Colm. It's one of the few cards that really could kind of counter Colm. Now, obviously, it's not perfect at countering Colm because you have to spend 2 credits into their 1 credit, but then they lose the credit, so you kind of go even, but then you're at a slight risk of it being sickled. But what's really nice is if they did turn 1 Colm, and then you did turn 1 Recon, they would have 1 credit on their turn 2. And with that 1 credit, if they sickle their Recon to keep their Colm alive, they're not developing the board whatsoever, and they can't just play out a Cavalry Regiment or a Type 94 and send them both face like they would against another deck, because then your 56th Recon can trade into Colm, and then the 1 damage will kill Colm and the 1 health unit, which means if they do want to play another unit, and that's their only play, they'll have to trade Colm into Recon first, meaning the Colm has been entirely neutralized. In fact, not only has it been entirely neutralized, you are now up on credits, because they spent 1 credit to play Colm, and then 0 to kill the Recon. You played 1 credit to play the Recon, but then the Colm lost them an additional credit. So Recon was incredibly powerful at beating back the Japan Soviets for the Intel deck, and now it is gone. So they're both being hit in a way. The more aggressive Japan deck lost Type 94, the Intel Legions version lost the 56th Recon. I think the 56th Recon is a bigger hit. Now, if you ask me which is a better card, Type 94 is very clearly the better card. But I think 56th Recon is a bigger hit to that deck than Type 94 is to the aggro deck. But just because there's nothing that really replaces it functionally. And speaking of Out of the Mist, they have also lost Out of the Mist too. I am so happy to see this card gone. This card was an absolute menace. And honestly, I'm like a little shocked that I never saw a nerf at any point. Just because this card almost ruined playing aggro decks on ladder, just because it is so powerful against Jaggro. For 1 credit, you can destroy their units. So already 1 credit for 1 credit, you're trading even. But then you also salvage it, so you're going better than even. But then also you are salvaging a 1 credit, presumably Blitz unit that can then trade with another unit. So you're essentially just getting a 2-for-1 off of your 1 credit standard order that really only counters 1 deck. So it wasn't that Out of the Mist was a clearly broken card in general. If you're playing like a control deck, Out of the Mist was fine. Sometimes you could like take something big like a Dechima or something, or like a 272nd or something. But like, it just made playing aggro miserable, because it'd be like, oh, if my opponent has Out of the Mist, I just lose the game on turn 1 if I do like a Type 94 and they Out of the Mist it. So I'm very happy to see this card gone. And then, if Intel had not lost enough, we have the Kards being rotated for Poland. So Poland is losing another card, or the Legion's deck is losing another card. And the nice thing about Kards is, if you just look at its body, it's pretty trash. 3 credit for a 2/2 bomber with 2 operation cost. Very, very bad. Even if it just says Intel on it, that's not good for Intel. Now, what's very good about Kards is it says at the end of your turn, add a Section 2 to your hand, and the Section 2 is the 2 credit order, draw a card, Intel. And that is where Kards gets very, very good. So Kards is effectively, it adds 2 Intel that you can play over 2 turns, and it also effectively has a card draw attached to it, but also it's still a bomber, so like, anytime you run a bomber in your deck, period, there's always the chance that you play it out early enough in the game and your opponent doesn't have an answer to it, and it snowballs just by being on board, and by the fact that it is a bomber, it can go through guards, it can hit the exact unit you want. But now, if it sticks around as a bomber, it's also snowballing you on card draw. So Kards is just an absolute beast in the Legion's deck, because you can throw it out early to try to snowball on the board, but you can also just like throw it out early to sort of like bring in attacks, take focus away from your other units, take focus away from your HQ. They spend time and resources hitting into the Kards. and it still has replaced itself in your hand as a intel card left in your hand to trigger your intel stuff later down the line once you have more credits. And then obviously the Kards and the 56 Recon both worked great with Thunder Division, since Thunder Division is buff all of your units whenever you intel, so if you play a unit with intel on it, it also gets buffed in the process. And now Kards is gone. So another very big hit to the Legions deck. Now let's take a look at Soviets, again going in reverse order. So they've lost Special Reinforcements, which was add a copy of the last destroyed unit to your hand. This card enabled a couple of silly combos by allowing you to get more copies of cards that would have otherwise be restricted on the number of copies you could have by their rarity. This was sort of the cheapest way to get there. And this card saw some play back when like Bryansk was around, where you'd have a bit more defensive early game that you could just be, you know, maybe you want more of it, but also maybe in the later game you want another big guy. It's just a very versatile tool. Unfortunately, it never saw that much meaningful competitive play, and now it is gone. T-35 is being rotated. This one is a big hit to self-damage, because honestly this card ended up being the star of self-damage, just because it is an on-curve tank, which is with good stats, so it's already just decent for trading, it's decent for reaching these 2 health bombers in the support line, it's decent for being able to push 2 damage to the HQ if they're playing like a ramp deck or a commander deck, something slower, but also its passive effect is also chipping away at the enemy's HQ, but also it's the passive effect that is just constantly triggering your when your HQ is damaged things, so as long as you don't die from it, which, you know, can sometimes happen where you're at like 1 or 2 health and you don't want to play T-35, it is otherwise a very, very good enabler for the self-damage deck, so this is a sort of sad hit to that deck. Red October is being rotated. I honestly forgot this card was in the game. I don't think I played it since 2019 when I was doing like a draft in Classic mode. We'll just move straight on to the OT-34. Deals double damage against infantry and HQ. This card was a silly card. This card used to cost 6, I believe, and then it got changed to costing 3, but it had Smokescreen. And then it started seeing some, like, weird play where you'd, like, play a deck around playing it against decks that can't deal with Smokescreen, and then setting up, like, an elaborate OTK. And then it got nerfed to lose Smokescreen. But honestly, this card saw no serious play, so we're just going to move straight on to Urban Fighting, another card which saw absolutely no play. Urban Fighting is a Brothers in Arms card. 4 credits, set the operation cost of a target unit to 4, and destroy adjacent damaged units. Now, if this didn't require the adjacent units to be damaged, this card would be insane, obviously. And I think that this card was a little underrated. I think there was a period of time where Soviet control probably could have justifiably run one of these, because it does get around can't be targeted effects. So if your opponent plays something like a Tiger IE, where, you know, it's the Tiger 1E, where it can't be targeted by orders. But if they have something next to it and you can damage the Tiger 1E and then you do that, you destroy it, there's some flex situations where it is useful. Also, if your opponents are building big boards and you're playing cards like Winter Warfare anyways for other stuff like ISU, Urban Fighting is a very good way to clean up a board earlier into the game. Now, obviously, once they got, like, Depths of Winter and then Strategic Focus, it's like, okay, you don't really need orders that are only quasi, like, AoE removal. So yeah, Urban Fighting did not really see any play. And then, last but not least, Soviets are losing the P-40B Tomahawk, which is a hit to Soviet-Japan aggro, which, honestly, the highlight to me of the most recent expansion tournament was just showcasing Tomahawk being playable for the first time ever. Because Tomahawk is an Allegiance card, which was laughed at for being one of the worst cards of the expansion, one of the worst cards in the game. Obviously, people tried it out in tokens, wasn't that good. It got a text buff to be deploy or add. I think it was originally just deploy. And that made it a little bit better, but still nobody really played Tomahawk. It was just too slow. But the Soviet-Japan aggro deck, the Soviet main version of that deck, did run Tomahawk, and it was quite successful. So ironically, it's very, very sad to see this plane, which for the first time ever is seen play, after being in the game since 2019, it's seen play in the game for the first time ever and it's been rotated out in a plane-themed expansion. That's just deeply, deeply ironic and very, very funny. I'm not actually upset about it, because, like, you know, it wasn't, like, the best card of Soviet Japan aggro, and Soviet Japan aggro wasn't, like, dominating the meta or anything. It's just a very funny change to me. And then we get down to US, who is losing 5th Medical Battalion. This card saw some play when it came out, and there was a lot of board-centric decks, a lot of board, like, unit-on-unit trading throughout the entire game, just going for value trades, and if there was a turn where you could slam down Medical Battalion, go for a bunch of value trades, and then all of your guys get healed back in a single turn, you probably just won the game. A lot of games were swung entirely off the back of Medical Battalion back in, like, 2022, whenever it came out, 2021. And yeah, that was a long time ago. Nobody's really doing anything with that anymore. Then US is losing Special Assignment, which, again, this is another change that I am quite happy with, because Special Assignment is a card that you would essentially never see, but whenever you did see it, you knew you were kind of getting mad about it, because it's when your opponent hit the, like, turn 2 War Machine, turn 3 Double War Machine, turn 4 Special Assignment, pull out Super Fortress, and you're like, what are the odds of this happening? Yeah, it's a silly card for silly decks, but it's a card that pushes a type of silly deck that I am not a big fan of, so I am happy with this card being gone. Then we come to Devil's Brigade. It's never quite been the same since it got nerfed from a 3-3 to a 3-2. When it was a 3-3 when it came out in Winter Warfare, this card was an absolute beast, one of the best cards in the game. At 3-2, it was still a very, very good card. This card also counted as a commando, so you would see people playing control decks with, like, 2 number 9 commandos and, like, 2 Devil's Brigade, and then Baker Street for just a little bit extra value generation. That was a very fun package. I was a huge fan of that package. And now that package is effectively dead because Devil's Brigade is gone. I would rather see number 9 commandos be gone, or I would much rather Baker Street Irregulars be gone, but this is the world we live in. Devil's Brigade is gone, and every Alpine player out there can release a big sigh of relief, because, oh my goodness, this card was brutal for Alpine. Like, Alpine was already in a spot where nobody essentially played it, but then when you had one of the most popular cards in the game just coincidentally saying, if the unit is Alpine, destroy it for free, and, like, there was basically, this was the only Alpine unit seeing competitive plays, but it was just so good as a unit, period. You would run this, so anybody trying to play Alpine cards, or even, like, not even an Alpine deck, but running Alpine cards in other decks, like 6th Alpini in Soviet Italy Control, your lives were ruined by this card. But now it's gone. Keeping in theme with rotating expensive, bad air units, we have the B-25H is being rotated, and this is not a hit for anyone ever playing this card, but it's a hit for the Bomber Mafia pool, because this was the only way to heal off of Bomber Mafia, and I can't count on my fingers the number of games I have lost to B-25H off of Bomber Mafia to heal just outside of lethal range in, like, an ultra-heavy ramp deck, or games that I lost to being at 2 health and being like, okay, they don't have enough credits to, like, attack with, like, Super Fortress or anything. I think I'm safe that they do, like, Bomber Mafia B-25H, deal 2 damage to the HQ through a fighter, so Havoc wouldn't have worked. And it's like, okay, well, that's annoying. So this is a hit to the Bomber Mafia pool if you are a good player and look at the pool as to how effective and tempo swinging the cards can be. If you just like to play ramp for the sake of ramp, this makes the Bomber Mafia pool better because you're more likely to be able to pick a much bigger bomber off of the card. Then we get to the M4A3R3 Zippo. This was one of my favorite cards in Draft, because Draft for a very long time was just all about 6 health infantries, and this was a 3-drop that could trade out a 6 health infantry, and also probably survive, because a lot of the big 6 health infantries were 3/6 infantries, and this is 4 health, and is essentially 6 attack against infantry, so this card holds a very special place in my heart as a draft card. Unfortunately, it has 2 op, so it's absolutely unplayable in any competitive sense. Moving on, we have CBs, which is sort of the core engine of the repair deck that never saw any play ever, and this card's absolute trash. And that is it for the reserved cards. So those are all of the cards going out into reserved. Most of them really, at the end of the day, don't matter. There's a few noticeable hits. So Type 94, 56th Recon, Karass, Lion for a Day are like sort of the hits of the cards that I've seen regular play. Lion for the Day has not really seen any regular play, but Type 94, Recon, and Karass I've seen regular play. Lion for a Day, Tomahawk, out of the mist see occasional play, and then sort of there's a bunch of stuff for reserved pools. But honestly, this is a pretty tame reserved list. The real big takeaway here is legions are getting hit hard by reserved. Now let's take a look at the cards that are coming in with the cards that are returning with the new expansion. So let me pull that up here on OBS. I could cut this out, but I kind of don't feel like it. So here we go. We have Oxford is returning. So this is a fighter from Britain, all about making your ground units have equal attack to defense. Unfortunately, it is all ground units have equal attack to defense, so it could be a double-edged sword, and this card kind of sucks. Now, I will say some of these cards are being changed, and we will look at those changes in a second, but for now, we're just going to discuss what is printed on the text, or the text that is printed on the card. So, Oxford, absolute garbage. Not going to see any play. Then we have Tiger 1E, the aforementioned card I talked about a little bit ago. This card was a beast when it came out in 2019 and then into 2020, a bit into 2021, sort of kept on hanging with Mare Nostrum. This card's really, really slow, though, and the game is no longer about playing really expensive big things that Soviets can't remove. The game is much more about killing your opponent as quickly as possible and never, ever, ever losing board control. So this isn't going to have much of an impact. Japan is gaining back the Key 46 Dina, which is a very unassuming card. You look at this card and you see, okay, 3 credits for a 1/3 fighter, absolute trash stats. Deployment to draw 2 random 1-cost units from your deck, so it's okay, absolute trash stats. It draws 2 cards, so like Convoy 3 credit, draw 2. This is 3 credit, draw 2 with a body, even if the body is terrible. However, the cards it draws are specific, so you have to run 1-cost units in your deck, and you also have to have not drawn all of your 1-cost units from your deck, or else this does nothing. So it really looks like it should be bad, and when this card was first revealed, people thought it was going to be bad. But it turns out it is very, very good, because you play this in a Jagro deck, which runs like 10 plus 1-cost units, and you run 4 expansions, and as however much additional card draws you can fit into the deck, but you're never running enough card draw to make up for how quickly you are going through cards. So just any unit which draws 2 1-cost units out of your deck that you can play on the same turn is just going to help the overwhelm the board playstyle of Jagro. And especially in the Japan-Soviet aggro, this is going to just fit straight in, because you're already running, on top of the normal Japanese 1-drops, you're already running Colm and Recon for the rush stuff, and just obviously Colm's just a really good unit. So Dita immediately going to fit into Japan-Soviet aggro. Is it going to fit into Legions? I would say yes, if they hadn't just lost 56th Recon, because this would also have drawn the 56th Recon. Unfortunately, you are losing 56th Recon and Type 94, so you could still run this with the Shock Infantry, and then maybe like 33rd Recon or something like that. I doubt that you're going to see a lot of Dina in Japan-Poland. You're going to see a lot of Dina in Japan-Soviet. So then Soviets get back Minority Recruits. So Minority Recruits has one of the strongest effects in the game printed on it, which is take control of an enemy unit. This is an incredible swing on the board. So, if your opponent plays down the biggest unit in their deck, it is the big win condition of the deck. They're going to crush you with like a Persian. They slam down a Persian, and it's their big Persian on the board. They spent 10 credits to play it, and then you steal it. So, effectively, for 1 card, you destroy the biggest unit in their deck, and then at the same time, you acquire the biggest unit in their deck on your side of the board. It sounds really, really powerful, right? Well, unfortunately, there is no good deck built around a single very large unit, and the the most very large win the game units in the game that like sometimes see play because they're generated off of things all say cannot be targeted by orders, so you can't play this on them. Looking at the Tiger 1E, looking at the King Tiger. And then also, it costs 10, so you have to survive to turn 10, and this card is literally doing nothing in your hand. Then odds are you're going to have to play it on, like, a Dragon Slayer to avoid dying on turn 10, if you haven't died already. And then also, the way that taking control of enemy units works is if it gets retreated, it returns to the hand of the player who played down the unit, which means you spend 10 credits to minority recruits to gain their unit. You probably can't operate with it because of how much you spent on playing this card to begin with, and then they, like, bounce it back to their hand and replay it, and then your minority recruits did nothing. So yeah, minority recruits is an absolutely terrible card. Even in the days of ultra-heavy Soviet control dominating the meta, nobody played minority recruits. That's how bad it was. In the era of big units and Soviet control, people already recognized this card was terrible. This card is absolutely terrible. Now, if we go compare this to the other cards, Oxford is abysmal. Tiger 1E, it's going back into the Contest Doctrine pool. Probably not going to see play, but might see play. It's not bad. Dina, amazing, fits directly into what is maybe the best deck in the game. And, okay, so, arguably the best nation in the game is getting an amazing card that fits directly into the best deck of that nation. And the worst nation in the game is getting one of the worst cards that ever got printed for them. Yeah, I genuinely do not, it boggles my mind. It's like Poland and Russia. Like, somebody at 1939 really, really does not like Slavic people. I can't explain it. Why do Soviets get absolute scraps when Japan gets Dina? But anyways, let's move on to US. US gained Counter-Strike. US is sort of the other nation in the game that is really struggling right now. And Counter-Strike is a card that actually did see a decent amount of play, especially considering that US didn't see a lot of play. And Counter-Strike is a 3-credit countermeasure when a unit attacks your HQ, destroy the unit. But back in the day where units were much more constrained, there was a lot more infantry going on. And you were fighting for the front line a lot. You'd use orders and whatnot to destroy things. You'd use units to trade out the front line. So you were much easier to make it so that your opponent was attacking your HQ with a very specific card, either like a blitz plane from their hand, or a single big infantry you left in the front line. And then you'd use Counter-Strike to destroy that for 3 credits. Now, unfortunately, in the time since this card last saw serious play, one, every single nation has gained, like, a stupid amount of blitz tanks for some reason. So there's always going to be, like, some stupid, like, Type 94-esque card exiting the hand, maybe it was randomly generated, and hitting the HQ. To trigger this, 2, people have just generally gotten much better at playing around countermeasures, so they're probably not going to throw their Comet into this while they have, like, a 1-drop in the front line. And 3, US has just gotten much worse cards on average, especially for US main decks, because this is an elite, than every other nation. So unfortunately, despite how much play this card used to see, I don't think it is going to see any play in its current form. But then let's go down to the limiteds. So US is getting back 5th Rangers, and unlike Counter-Strike, which sucks and probably won't see any play, 5th Rangers is an excellent card which still might see no play. So, 5th Rangers, when it came out, absolutely dominated the meta. This card was stupidly powerful for the entire time that it was in the game before being rotated. And that's because 5th Rangers is a 4-credit 4/4 infantry, with Blitz, which can be a 0-op Blitz, so a 4-credit 4/4 0-op Blitz infantry, which I know in the day of current cards in 2025, that doesn't sound amazing. It doesn't sound bad, but it doesn't sound like, oh, that doesn't sound game-breaking. But it was fairly good, especially because it was a US unit, and US frontline was a very powerful deck that required you to have US units in the frontline. But what was really powerful about 5th Rangers is the versatility, because the other option is it gains +4/+4, but keeps the 4 operation cost, which means if Frontline was going later into a control match where their opponent has sort of been able to keep them from having a big board, you're running low on cards, now these 5th Rangers just turn into massive 8/8 guys who you can throw into the front line and really just force their hand and say, you know what, did you keep enough hard removal to counter the 8/8 5th Rangers I'm now tossing at you? Now, unfortunately, 5th Rangers always existed before Suppress existed. And what happens if you suppress a 5th Rangers is it becomes a 4/4 with 4 op, which is absolutely and completely and utterly unplayable. So yeah, that's rather unfortunate. And also, just Frontline has fallen off the face of the earth, not because they lost 5th Rangers, but because every other deck is much better at taking the frontline, or much better at stopping US from keeping the frontline than before. And also, there's just better draw options than Shermans in other nations. So I don't think 5th Rangers is going to be great. The other awkward thing about 5th Rangers is it doesn't work the way you want it to with Throp. So it does, if you play it and choose the gain 0 operation cost, that happens before the when you play a unit with 3 or more operation cost stuff, so it's not going to trigger with Moroccans or Le Terrible or any of the other stuff. So yeah, the 5th Rangers, it's interesting. It's much better than Counter-Strike. Might see play in US decks. Probably will see play in US decks. The issue is I don't think that this really moves the needle in how good US decks are. Then let's go back to Soviets, and you'll start to notice a theme here for Soviets. So Soviets gain minority recruits with their elite, absolutely abysmal. Then they gain partisans for their special, which is 6 credits, take control of an enemy unit at the end of turn, send it to its owner's hand. So essentially, it is like minority recruits, but for 4 credits less, you do the retreating it back to their hand for them. So that sounds like it might be a lot worse, because you're thinking, well, why would I? It still costs 6 credits, that's a lot, and then it goes back to their hand anyways. Well, what's really good about this is if you can play partisans, you're going to more likely have credits left over to attack with the unit, so maybe you can just trade off the unit immediately, and this works especially well against like mid-range decks where they might have 2 medium-sized units on the board, and then you use partisans to take them both out. I remember something that would happen quite frequently against Frontline is they would have a 0 op 5th Rangers in the front line, and at 4/4 infantry, and then they would have a 4/4 Sherman in the support line, which they had just played, and then you play partisans, and you take the 0 up 4/4 5th Rangers, and you attack it into the 4/4 Sherman, and then for 6 credits you destroyed both units, and you're feeling pretty happy with yourself. Or, if you're just taking a big unit, you can then play something like Red Banners, which was brought back in the last rotation change, to destroy it and turn it into a new unit, and it's now under your control. It is now impervious to being retreated. It no longer returns to their hand, and that's really, really good. Now, unfortunately, that is an 8 credit cost. That is an 8 credit combo with 1 elite, 1 special, and also, if you want to attack with it, you're going to need more credits on top of that. And yeah, the game is just too fast right now for this to matter. Partisans was already drastically overrated when it existed, and even before it got rotated out, people were really not playing it, and the meta has only become less useful and more hostile to partisans seen any substantial play. So unless the meta just for some reason really slows down, I don't think partisans is going to matter a whole lot. And then we get to Japan. Well, what's Japan getting? So, again, Soviets least played major nation in the game right now, competitively, if I had to bet. Maybe slightly better than USA exclusively because of Soviet-Japan aggro, which is just the, younger cousin to Japan-Soviet aggro. They get absolutely abysmal elite and a fine special from a bygone era that's probably not going to see any play. Japan gets incredible elite that's going to fit immediately into their best deck, and they get back Type 94 TK, which this might be one of the most underrated cards in the history of cards. So Type 94 TK came out in Allegiance in 2019, December 2019, the first expansion for cards. And when it came out, it saw no play. And you might be thinking, okay, well, how did it get buffed since then? Type 94 TK has never been buffed. Now, what was buffed is the surprise attack, because it says deployment add a surprise attack to your hand. Surprise attack used to be 2 credits, now it's 1 credit. It is 1 credit, pin an enemy unit. If it's already pinned, destroy it. And people all still took, even after the change to surprise attack, it took them a long time to pick up Type 94 TK. Because if you look at it, it is a 1 credit, 1/1 tank with 0 op. That's really, really good. That's like Type 94 TK early. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't have Blitz. And also, it doesn't snowball its attack. And it also doesn't draw a card like Sasebo. What does this card do? It adds a surprise attack to your hand. 1 credit, pin a unit. Doesn't seem excellent. It adds like a worse naval power to your hand. Why would you play a, like, deployment gain a worse naval power to your hand? Well, that's the thing, is if you're playing a Japan deck that can really go through a lot of cards very quickly, you can pick up 2 Type 94s, and you just hold on to the first surprise attack, and then suddenly becomes 2 credits, destroy any unit in the game. And that's excellent. You just pick up 2 Type 94s, and you have destroy an enemy unit, which is very, very, very powerful. And what you gain is just something you can play down on turn 1 that is going to operate for free. You never have to spend any more credits on it for the rest of the game. Now, there is a slight hiccup now with Akagi, because one of the main card draws for Japan is Akagi, which is shuffle all cards in your hand back into your deck, which doesn't really work well if you're trying to hold on to surprise attacks. But also, just surprise attack to pin an enemy unit is very underrated in an aggressive deck, because you would never want to play a card like Naval Power in an aggressive deck, because that's just a waste of card, because you want to snowball on board. You want to have every card be able to deal damage to the HQ, essentially, or draw cards into things that can damage the HQ if you're playing an aggressive deck. But this is a thing that can damage the HQ that then gives you a 1 credit pin, which can just be like, if your opponent's playing down something like an 845th or a Fiat, something that's like a unit that's going to attack into your front line and also heal, and it's going to be annoying, and you pin it for 1 credit, and not only does it delay the heal, it's also keeping your unit alive, so that's additional damage into the HQ, and then you might combine that with, like, that additional alive unit with like a Blitzkrieg or Type 93 or a way to buff up an AoE attack of your units, and then suddenly things are very hunky-dory for you. So essentially what I'm getting at is Type 94 is an incredible card. One of the best cards Japan has ever had. It was played in almost every single Japan deck once people realized how insane it was. Even Control would play this, and they'd play it specifically with Dina, because you would play like a Control deck with like 3 Type 94s, and Dina like basically draws your Type 94s for you, so now you're even a higher chance of getting 2 surprise attacks in your hand at once. And yeah, they played it until it was rotated, and it was rotated because it was played so much. And now it is back. So, does this fit into Japan-Soviet aggro? I honestly don't know. I mean, the surprise attack kind of is a worse, or in a lot of ways worse than Rush. And that's kind of what Japan-Soviet aggro is doing now, is they are capitalizing on very, very cheap tempo swings on the board, and that's kind of what Type 94 was doing. So it might not be as good enough to see play in that, but it might push a more Japan-German aggro back to playability, and even if not now, in the future, if once Soviets have been sufficiently nerfed to the point of people moving away from the Soviet ally, or just moving away from Rush, or whatever it is, Type 94 is going to have a huge impact, even if not immediately. German special is Eagle Day, so put a German air unit into play with Blitz, return it to your hand at the end of turn. This is essentially just like an OTK card for bad OTK decks. You play this with something like the Junkers, which is the 7-cost Fury Bomber, and then you like bolster the Junkers, and then you hit them in the HQ for a lot, and then Junkers goes back to your hand. People played Eagle Day OTK, it was never good. Absolutely never saw play in any, like, Tier 1 deck, or even Tier 2, or even Tier 3 deck, to be completely honest with you. However, we are getting an air-themed expansion, so maybe they're going to release cards specifically to synergize with Eagle Day for Germany. We could only wait and see, I suppose. Then Britain is getting back the Argyllshire Highlanders, which is a 3-credit 1/6 infantry that gets +1/+1 when you deploy or add a guard unit. Obviously, this has some synergy with the... I was going to say legions. It has synergy with legions. It also has synergy with garrisons. Unfortunately, probably not going to see much play. I don't think this really moves the needle on garrison decks being good. And then, last but not least, let's look at the standard card that each nation is getting back. Britain is getting back Welsh Guards, so give another, it's a 1 credit, 1/2, give another target +1 defense. This card actually started seeing a lot of play right before it got rotated for the first time ever, because of Stiff Upper Lip, which is 2 credits, draw 2 cards if you have a guard unit. And if you played a lot of guard units, especially a lot of cheap guard units like Welsh Guards, you were very consistently using that as a 2-credit convoy. And if you could save a credit anywhere, you're happy with it. Also, just a 1-credit guy that slows down aggro and also heals you. Very, very good. So yeah, Welsh Guards, solid card. I don't know if the meta is really positioned for Welsh Guards to come back into, like, immediately to see play, but it saw play in the past, so it might see play in the future. Germany is getting back Entrapment, which means for everybody who hates playing against countermeasures or hates playing against Aufklärung, Entrapment is now a new 5-credit card countermeasure to remember. It is when a unit attacks anything anywhere on the board, destroy it, and then all of your units get +1/+1. So very, very powerful countermeasure. Unfortunately, it costs 5. However, what's great about Entrapment is sometimes you're just in a position where you have snowballed hard enough that your opponent's forced to hope you don't have it. Unfortunately, there's not really any German decks that are doing that, and there's very few decks that you were playing against that are going to be snowballed into that position where the game isn't already lost. Japan is getting back Imperial Decree. This card was a staple, one of the big, big winners of Japan-France resistance. Unfortunately, Phony War is gone, and I don't really see what other deck. Like, I suppose the fully dedicated Japan burn decks maybe run this, just because it's a cheap way to add additional damage to your plays while emptying your hand as quickly as possible for stuff like Akagi or Take Liberty. Maybe. Probably not that relevant. Soviets, of course, regained Confusion, so they just gained all of their Take Control cards back, with the notable exception of the 39th Rifles Regiment, I believe it's called, the Mr. Steal Your Girl, as Corn Guy would say, the 5-credit 5/5 take control of a unit with cost 2 or less. That guy was an absolute monster. That guy was one of the best cards Soviets have ever had, and I'm just very happy it is gone. I'm complaining about Soviets getting absolute garbage. I would rather Soviets get absolute garbage than Soviets get, like, one of the best meta warping cards in the game, in the form of a just win the game on the spot turn 5 elite. Now, what they are getting back is Confusion, which is take control of an enemy unit with cost 3 or less until end of turn. So this is a very potent anti-aggro tool. So for 3 credits, if you take a 0-op cost guide, you can trade it into a second 0-op, well, or just a second unit, and it dies. 3 credits, destroy 2 units. Amazing. Unfortunately, that is not the case against a lot of decks, and then if you want to use it in combination with a destroy it and turn it into something else, that is going to require 5 credits, and suddenly that's not looking nearly as appealing. And also, it's a 2-card combo. So yeah, I've seen people discussing this card. Obviously, this card, if you're exclusively playing Japan-Soviet aggro, this card is probably pretty good. Unfortunately, this card is not very good against a lot of other decks. And that's kind of the way the game works, is you play against a variety of decks. So I don't think Confusion is really going to be that useful. Also, Confusion was in the game for a very long time. Like, when Confusion came out, it saw a lot of play. And there was definitely a period where Confusion was seeing a lot of play. But there was also a long period of time where Confusion was seeing no play before it was rotated. And I don't think anything has changed to make Confusion better. And then last but not least, the F4F for Wildcat is coming back, a 3-credit 3/3 fighter for USA that gives your HQ smokescreen while it is alive. It is a plane-themed expansion. This card didn't really see any play, but hey, maybe it's going to have synergy with the new planes for US. But anyways, that is it for cards returning. The big winner here is clearly Japan. Japan getting excellent cards, and everyone else kind of getting very bad cards. Yeah, that's really all there is to say about returning cards. But hey, if you look at the cards that got hit, Japan also got hit the hardest with rotation. Well, specifically, Poland got hit really hard, and then Japan-Soviet aggro is winning very hard here. Now, that is all of the cards that are leaving and returning from the game, but some cards are changing here. So let's look at the cards that are changing. in the balance patch. And again, the balance patch comes out before the rest of the expansion. So the cards aren't rotating until some point in September, but this balance patch is coming out tomorrow as of the day of recording, on the 28th. So we're not going to read through all of this text, but essentially they are explaining why it took so long to get this balance patch. I know this is something a lot of people have complained about. A lot of people I have seen saying, what I don't know is hyperbole or just selective memory, but a lot of people are saying, like, oh, I can't believe they've waited so long before doing a balanced patch. Like, why would they wait the entire summer before a balanced patch? This is the worst meta we've ever had. I can tell you, as somebody who's been playing this game a lot since it came out, this is definitely not the worst meta we've had. This isn't even the top 5 worst metas we've had. And yeah, if you think otherwise, you haven't been playing very long, or you do not have a great memory. There's been much, much, much worse points in Cards history to play the game. Second, this is something that Cards does every single year. They almost always have a rolling vacation through July and August, so essentially nothing gets done in July and August, balance patch-wise, with very rare exception, and that's always been the case since, like, really the beginning of Cards. So I don't really know why people every single year, they seem to forget that 1939 has a summer vacation. But we are honestly lucky that we are getting a patch in August. But I do think that does speak to the fact that a lot of people are very, very bored with the game. So they call out a few decks that are causing some grief, notably Commandos, decks like Intel. Obviously, they're talking about Japan-Soviet Legions. Soviet Jagro, this is obviously talking about the Japan-Soviet aggro, but also, I suppose, Soviet-Japan aggro. Navy Burn, this is talking about the German-Japan burn deck, and the German-US mid-range, obviously talking about the 1-2-3 deck. So this is essentially talking about the big winners of the expansion right now, with a notable lack of mentioning Handlock. If you looked at my best decks of the expansion right now, I think the only deck that is missing from this, that was in that one, was the Handlock decks. And I think that makes sense, because I think very clearly Handlock is the weakest of those strategies. But anyways, those are the big ones that they want to see, that they are seen as a bit problematic, maybe a bit too strong. And then they say we want to buff strategies that maybe didn't pan out, and talking specifically about Shuffle, which was a Japan-France archetype, and US Navy, which has a few different allies you can do, but basically just the big US thing that they got from naval warfare. So let's take a look at the nerfs. So the first nerf is to Commander Raid. It is going from 5 credits to 6 credits. And I have some stuff to say about this. So, we shouldn't have to ask, is something a nerf? But this has happened enough times that I think it's always worth starting when you look at a nerf by 1939 asking, is this really a nerf? And in this case, absolutely, it is really a nerf. And this is a significant nerf. Every time you play Commando Raid, it costs 1 more. It costs 1 more turn to get to Commando Raid for the very first time. It costs 1 more turn to get to a Commando Raid that you can combo with. This is just a big nerf to Commandos. Is this enough of a nerf to Commandos? I don't know. Is this the way I would have changed Commando Raid? Absolutely not. So, let's go a brief walk down memory lane of Commando Raid. Commando Raid was released in a Commando-themed expansion for Britain, where Britain got several cards that tried to push Commandos, and it got released as a 3-credit order, pin an enemy unit, summon a Commando. And it was essentially just supposed to be more ways of getting additional copies of number 10 Commandos beyond the 3 you get just running them as units, and then the 2 you get from Night Red. And Commandos did not see a lot of play, because there was just better things to be doing, namely ramp, with Britain. Then, it got buffed to 4 credits, deal 1 damage, add 2 number 10 Commandos to your front line. And that card was very, very, very clearly broken. That card should have never been released. That card should never been printed. They at no point should have thought, hey, let's make a cheap card that summons 2 number 10 Commandos at once. because that is insane, because number 10 commandos get better the more you have on the board. So if you have a single card that summons them on the board, on top of the ones you can already play in your deck, that's getting very, very crazy. And then you have that card cost at 4, which is just the cost of playing 2 commandos. So it's effectively play 2 commandos and get additional upside with the ping, and then also the additional upside of it only costs 1 card to play, and then also the additional upside of it's an order, so it gets reduced by Pioneer, it draws off of Crusader, and it triggers other commandos on the board. So yeah, 4-cost Commander Raid was absolutely insane, and genuinely one of the worst balancing decisions ever made by 1939, which is saying a lot. And then obviously it was too powerful, it was the best deck in the game, and they nerfed it from 4 credits to 5 credits, which was a mistake. Why? Because obviously that's like taking by far the best card in the game, or one of the most, best is kind of difficult to evaluate there, but you're taking just one of the most pushed cards in the game and then being like, okay, let's make it from very clearly pushed miles harder than anything has ever been pushed, and make it pushed in the normal sense that you might see certain decks be pushed if you want that deck to see a lot of play. However, you were discounting the fact that you just went from everybody getting smashed by commandos and just being sick of commandos, and then you're going to leave it in a pushed format, instead of doing something like, say, recognize, hey, maybe it was a mistake to have printed a card that summons 2 commandos. Let's back up on this, and then maybe put it back to 3 credits, deal 2 damage, and summon a number 10 commando. Or maybe 3 credits, deal 1 damage, gain 1 HQ, summon a number 10 commando. Or, I don't know, just do anything that is not the original version. Obviously, I understand why they don't want to just be like, hey, we buffed this card and we're immediately nerfing it back to what it used to be, because then you look like an idiot. But just do anything that does not add 2 number 10 commandos to your support line. Literally just anything. But no, they did not make that change. They instead nerfed it to 5 credits, and then, lo and behold, it continued to see play. And then they tried the solution of, let's not nerf Commander Raid again, let's instead rotate every single other card in Commandos, and lo and behold, Commandos was still one of the best decks in the game. It's almost like the thing to be looking here for is Commandos went from being unplayable, and then we got a Commando-themed expansion, and they were unplayable, and then you buffed Commander Raid, and then it was the best deck in the game. And then you kept Commander Raid somebody to Commandos, and it was the best deck in the game. And then you rotated everything else, and it was still the best deck in the game. It's almost like the thing that makes Commandos good is exclusively Commander Raid and not any other card in the deck. It's almost like that. It's almost like anybody who has any understanding of how the deck works, has any understanding of, like, just how to look at the history of cards and the history of when Commandos has been good, can figure out that Commando Raid is the card. Why was this card not changed back to somebody in only 1 commando? I don't know. Why was this card not rotated? I actually think it might not be eligible for rotation until the winter expansion. I'm not positive about that off the top of my head. But you could have made an exception. You could have just deleted this card. And what did they do? Well, they just made a 6 credit. So you're not really solving the problem. Like, you're nerfing commandos a lot, don't get me wrong. This is a big nerf to commandos. But, like, you're kind of just kicking the can down the road. Like, is Commandos ever going to be tier 1 again with a 6 credit Commander Raid? Maybe not. But, like, maybe you're going to release another credit cheat card down the line, and then maybe it is. Or maybe just ramp continues to be strong enough that Commando Raid works its way back. Maybe the game slows down a little bit, and then Commando's decks aren't under as much pressure to survive, and they can wait that 1 extra turn to reach their Commando Raid, and then they're just going straight back to dealing like 40 damage from hand against you, because you're playing a control deck in a control meta. Why are we doing this? Like, this is just Sisyphus pushing the Commando Raid up the mountain, and then being shocked that Commandos are a tier 1 deck. But anyways, that's enough complaining about the Commander Raid, because obviously if you wanted to nerf Commandos, you would just make this card stop summoning 2 Commandos. But that's not what we're going to do. However, that's not the only nerf to Commandos, because obviously this still might have left Commandos in a tier 1 spot. Not necessarily the best deck in the game, but this easily could have left Commandos in tier 1 if this was the only change to Commandos. So what other change are you going to make to Commandos? There's a few very powerful cards that maybe are a bit overtuned in Commandos. Like the number 9 commando, it's not often run directly at the deck, but you get it off of Baker Street Irregulars fairly frequently. That's a very powerful card. Or, actually, speaking of it, Baker Street Irregulars is a very stupid card in that it can generate randomly additional commando raids or additional commandos or additional Baker Street Irregulars to combo with your commandos. Maybe you shouldn't have that be a thing. Maybe you should make that cost 2. Maybe you should do anything to change one of the other very powerful cards in the deck that are new. But no, how else are we going to nerf this archetype that has been around since the game started in since the game came out in open beta in 2019, Commandos has been around. It hasn't always been good. Sometimes it's been good, sometimes it's been bad, but it has been around. It is one of the most identifiable archetypes of the game, and it has exclusively been meta-breaking because of this one card. How else are we going to nerf this deck? Okay, this is enough preamble. They decided to nerf the commando unit. So this nerfs the unit you can play directly, and it also nerfs the unit that you get off of Commando Raid or Night Raid. And it says after you give a British order, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. So it no longer works with non-British orders, which means in the US ramp commandos, it no longer triggers off of your war machines and war bonds, and importantly, it no longer triggers off of neutral orders that you can get off of the generated token orders, specifically the plan and the production off of the Protected Convoy. So that's another card they could have nerfed was Protected Convoy. But no. No, we're not going to nerf any of the broken cards. We're not going to nerf any of the cards that very clearly made Commandos great, or broken, more than great. We are going to nerf the unit that has been in the game for 6 years and is exclusively causing problems because of this card that they refuse to revert the change on because they just can't accept that. I don't think it's that they don't understand that this card is broken, or that 72 Commandos is a problem. I think it's that they don't want the humiliation of having to change it back to doing the old effect. They don't want to be seen as, like, admitting defeat in that way. So instead they are just going to burn the entire archetype to the ground for the rest of time because of their refusal to change this card. I'm not even a Commandos player. I have said it before. I don't love Commandos. I play Commandos from time to time, especially when it's not good. The less good Commandos are, the more fun it is to play because you're just trying to make something that's off-meta work, and that's enjoyable. But I've said it before, I hate when Commandos are good, not because of when I play against it. I don't want to see Commandos never see play ever again. I don't like it when it's good because I'm a competitor, I play good decks, and when Commandos are good, it means I have to play Commandos, and playing Commandos can be very frustrating. So I am not like a Commando advocate. I know there are people out there who have loved Commandos and it's their favorite archetype, and it's been their favorite archetype since they started playing the game, who are going to be very upset about this change. I am not one of those people. I don't frequently play Commandos. If you've been following me on YouTube and following my Cards career, you know I don't frequently play Commandos. So when I talk about being upset about this, it's not from the place of like an emotional response of I really love Commandos. It's from the response of being just a Cards fan and saying you are burying one of the original archetypes of the game because of your own hubris. Like, that's just frustrating. So well, first of all, we'll talk. Is this actually enough to kill the deck? I think with these being the only 2 changes, and they didn't lose anything to rotation, I think Commandos are still good. I actually do. And I know I just went on a rant about them killing Commandos, but that's the thing, is Commando Raid is eventually going to have to be rotated. If they want people to stop playing it, they need to rotate it. And the second Commando Raid gets rotated, this is just awful. This is absolutely awful. The only thing keeping Commandos alive is the fact that you could get 2 of them at once off of this card. So is it still going to be tier 1? I'd be a little surprised if it was still tier 1. I think the deck is still solidly tier 2. I think that this change is not that important with the current build of the deck, because the current build of the deck isn't actually running that many US cards, and the US cards they are running, you are often not playing on your Commander pop-off turns. So obviously the big thing here comes into you can't string multiple Protected Convoys together and ping off of all of the productions you're playing. But, like, you know, how many times does Commando deal, like, 20 additional damage necessary to kill you? Well, you know, if they don't trigger commandos off of like 3 or 4 of those, like if 3 or 4 of those waves of pings don't trigger, but they're still dealing 20 extra damage, it doesn't matter that they kill you from hand. And, you know, it's 1 additional credit. It's 1 additional credit and the damage doesn't kill you 10 times. So, like, obviously, it's a big hit to the deck. It is a very big hit to the deck. It's probably not tier 1. And people might even stop playing it, because when a deck gets nerfed, oftentimes people stop playing it regardless of how good or bad the deck is after the nerf. But they managed to just... They didn't even axe the deck to like, if they just came in here and just obliterated the deck, like they made Commander Raid like 10 credits, and they made Baker Street Irregular 10 credits, and they made Number 9 Commando 10 credits, and they made Protected Convoy 10 credits. Like, if they just went in there and absolutely deleted the deck off the face of the planet without touching Number 10 Commando, that's something they could have done. Obviously, that's like extreme hyperbole, but it would have stopped people from playing the deck now, which is the main goal. People are just sick and tired of playing against Commandos because it's been one of the best decks and one of the most played decks on ladder for way too long now. Like, we're coming up to like a year of people regularly playing Commandos as a tier 1 deck. People just don't want to stop playing this. So why did you do a change that somehow kills the deck's potential in the future as a fun tier 2 deck that is one of the core archetypes of cards in a way that doesn't really kill its ability to be played now? But okay, I need to stop talking about that, or this video is going to be forever long. Let's get to FW189. I'm very happy with this change. I think this is a very good change, and I think this is a very smart change. So obviously, this is an intended change to hit the burn deck, the German-Japan burn deck. And I know a lot of people are probably here thinking, well, why didn't they nerf Gifu? Or why didn't they nerf the Marines, I think it is? You know, obviously Gifu's the one that draws whenever you play a Navy card, and the Marines is the one that deals the HQ damage whenever you play a Navy card. And those are the cards that you lose to, in that they are the cards that are on the board when you are losing the game. But what people, I think, tend to underestimate is the power of like the 3 or 4 additional credits they got off of their FW they played on turn 1, because it has 3 health and it can't be traded. Like, it can trade into a cavalry and survive. It can get a hit from a 35 key and survive. This guy was just an absolute monster. So I think this is a very good change. It makes FW much harder to keep alive, and that is just generally a good thing. I would still like to see it worded in a way that you can't get multiple productions from multiple 189s on the board at once. Like, I think if you have 2 189s on the board and then you play a Navy card, you should get 1 production instead of 2. But that's just me. I think this is just a good change. Is burn still a little silly? Yes, in that I don't see why Gifu and Marines both needed shock, and Gifu needs to get, like, repeated shock, because it just makes the game so toxic to play against as any, like, mid-range or aggro Boyd-based deck, because it's just like, well, I can't take the support line, because they're just going to gain infinite shock and kill everything the second it enters it. And also, I can't not take the support line because their units will kill me without ever entering the front line. So it's a pretty toxic deck, pretty toxic play styles, but I think 189 is a good place to start there. Speaking of very powerful cards, we have Rush is now deal 4 damage to a random enemy instead of deal 5 damage. This is good at just making it less stupidly powerful against control decks, because it always sucks when you're like, you know, you're playing out. If you're playing like an aggro v aggro start, like you're playing like frontline, you play down a Greyhound, Rush is still gonna ruin your life. It's still gonna like nuke your Sherwood, it's gonna nuke your Greyhound, it's gonna nuke your combat engineers, whatever you play, it's gonna die to Rush. But what really sucks is when you're playing like a control deck and like you've started to stabilize against Japan Soviet aggro, and then you play like a 6 cost 5 health unit, and then they like kill it for free, or they kill it with like their 1 cost card and they played it on a recon, so they also draw to replace it, and you're like, okay. This is just a good change. It doesn't change the effect of the card in the early game essentially at all, and it doesn't affect the use of the card in like half of the matchups in the game, at least, but it affects the powerfulness of the card in some very specific matchups, mainly for decks that are seeing on like less play right now. Now, obviously, there's a few things like well, now it's harder to kill the Marines and Gifu from the burn deck for Japan Soviet. But Japan Soviet, I think, is probably the best deck in the game right now. So Rush getting hit does help, especially because they're getting so much from the expansion. Like, they're getting Dina, and they're only losing type 94. So, yeah, this is, I think, is a reasonable start to it. I know a lot of people thought about making it 2 credits or make it deal 2 damage to an enemy or friendly unit or something like that. But I think it's fine. Then we get to 1-2-3s, and 1-2-3s, this is not the nerf that I thought it was going to get. I thought the nerf would maybe make it be either just a change to the way convert works as a mechanic so that it can't attack multiple times, or make it be like, when you deploy a unit, this unit is converted into it and gains this ability and gets pinned, so you can't use blitz on units or something like that. They decided to do a slightly less aggressive nerf to the card and just make it 3 credits, and then even for upside, giving it a 2-3 stat line, just so now you are more likely to keep it alive if you just play it out of your hand on 3 for 3 credits without immediately converting it into something, whereas the 1-1 version, you literally could never play it unless you were converted. So this is interesting. I don't think anyone's really going to play it out from hand a whole lot. I don't think that's going to really happen much. But just making this card 3 credits, it just makes it a bit harder to do the wombo combos with it. And that's good, because 1-2-3 was clearly a very, very powerful card. And then we have the Thunder Division is being nerfed to once per turn. I would say that this is a bit overkill on Legions, in that, like, Legions is by far the hardest hit by rotation. However, making Thunder Division once per turn is just something that should have been on the card when it got released. I don't know why it wasn't. So this is just making a outlier card work the way that it should work. And I think that's fine. Now let's get to buffs. So these are the nerfs. So Legion's got a hit. 1-2-3's got a hit. Japan Soviet Aero got a hit. Burn got a hit. And Commandos got hit. And if we look at the stuff that they wanted to hit, that is everything that they wanted to hit. So they nerfed the clear best decks of the game. Now let's get to the buffs. So Second Marines is going from a 3 credit 3-4 to a 2 credit 2-3, keeping the blitz. So in some ways this is worse, because obviously it is a reduction in stats, but primarily it is better, and that is because the veteran version is going from a 4-4 to a 3-4. So the stat reduction is less on the veteran, so it makes it easier to veteran this card, because you can play it for less to combine with the Navy card, and you're losing less downside once it is veteran. And then also the veteran cost is also reduced just in case it gets retreated, but probably not happening. But yeah, this is just a solid change to the deck. It also makes the deck a little bit cheaper to sort of fight for the board in the early game, which is good because I think the meta is fast enough that 3 drops kind of a bit slow already at that point. I don't think this is going to move the needle a lot for the US deck. I know I've been saying that expression a lot. But I don't think this is going to make a big deal, but it's a little bit better. Then we have the A6 M20 going from 5 credits to 4 credits. This is a classic card. And I don't just say that because it was in the classic set or the base set of the game. But also, this is just a card which was one of the best cards in the game, and it never got changed, and it just stopped seeing play. This card was very clearly power crept, but I remember when you were playing, before any of the expansions came out, just in Classic, Zero was a beast of a card, because there was very few cards that targeted air units, like removal. Like, Hammer was sort of the best thing in the game, and Hammer doesn't hit air units. So Zero was very difficult to remove. And it has Ambush, and Ambush actually meant something, because not everything had Suppress, and not everything was a 4-5 Blitzer. So Ambush Zero, very, very difficult to remove. Very powerful card. Then it got just ludicrously power crept by everything that came after it. So now it is 4 credits. And at 4 credits, I actually think that there's a possibility that this sees play. So the deployment deal 1 damage is good. We've seen deployment deal 1 damage cards see a lot of play over the days. With Nebelwerfer, doesn't see a ton of play anymore now. But Devil's Brigade saw a ton of play. Now, obviously, Devil's Brigade also had Blitz, and this doesn't. But we also have a 4-credit 4/4 fighter, and that stat line has seen a fair amount of play, notably in the form of Zestorer. Now, Zestorer had 0 operation cost, and this has 2 operation costs, and that's a very, very big difference. But Zestorer was, for a lot of decks, just a threatening card that needed to be removed immediately, not just because of its 0 operation cost so it could attack for free, but also just because you might not always have the opportunity to remove a fighter from the support line against an aggressive deck that is going to just keep it around for suppression stuff or just hitting you in the HQ whenever they get the chance. And also, if Zestorer attacks twice, it has 2 operation costs. So obviously you're losing out on like 3 credits in effect on the first 2 times that it attacks. But in return for losing out on those 3 credits, you are gaining ambush and deal 1 damage. Now, is that worth 3 credits? Absolutely not. However, that is assuming that this gets to attack twice. Now, it might be that if it attacks twice, you win the game. So, at that point, if 3 credits win the game, that's absolutely worth it. So, if this card gets removed immediately, this is way, 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 way better than Zestorer. Also, it's not a German slot, so if you're playing specifically a Japan-German aggro deck, which is sort of what I'm envisioning playing 0, or like a mid-rangey deck maybe, you're not taking up precious German slots to run this. And also, we're just headed generally into a air unit-themed expansion, so this is absolutely a powerful card that has a high potential of seeing play. Now, I don't think this is going to see play in like the Japan-Soviet aggro deck, to be clear. I don't think this is just like an auto-include in every deck because it's so good. I'm absolutely not saying that. I think this is just a very solid unit that is likely to see some play at various points in the future. Then we see the Sept regiment getting buffed, and this is an absolutely crazy buff. So the Sept regiment was, once per turn when you shuffle, distribute damage between random enemies equal to friendly units. Now it is once per turn when you shuffle, distribute damage randomly to enemies equal to units in play. So, essentially what happened is this now includes enemy units on the board. So this is now essentially just cast, whenever you shuffle and this is on the board, cast Shinano. And Shinano is a 3-credit card which sees play. So, and this can do it, it's limited to once per turn, but if they can't kill the Sept regiment, it's sticking around. And then also, for absolutely no reason, it got a stat buff from 3 to 4, which means it now works with the German 5-credit elite Panzer Grenadier that makes units with 4 or more attack deal 3 extra damage. Because now it will, every single ping will deal 4 damage. So now you're casting Shinano with 4 damage pings. Now, obviously, that's a 2-card, 9-credit plus combo that's limited to German main, so it's probably not going to matter. But that is just something you can do now. Essentially, this card is absolutely insane, and they said that they wanted to push Shuffle, and this certainly does push Shuffle, because it is a card you run in a Shuffle deck. But Sept Regiment is a card you could run in any deck. Not any deck, but you could run it in a fair number of decks, including Legions, which is just coincidentally running a lot of shuffle cards already. So Sept Regiment kind of fits perfectly into a Legions deck because it's already running stuff like Duggan and the, I'm blanking on the name of it, but the 1-credit Intel Order that shuffles a card, and they're running other shuffle stuff. I've seen a bunch of them running Akagi and Take Liberty. And again, the Japan-Soviet deck, it's running at least 2 Akagis and the Elite Recon that shuffles a card back into your deck. It wouldn't take that much to run a couple more shuffles, and then you're running Sept Regiment and you're just using it as an additional burn tool. Like, this card is probably good enough to consider trying to fit into every single Japan deck you build. It might not make it into every Japan deck, but it's good enough that you're certainly going to try to see if you can, because it is stupidly powerful. And, again, Japan is getting hit the hardest, generally, by things, but it's also getting the most. I think we're going to stick with the reign of Japan being the best deck, at least until we see what the new expansion cards offer. Then we have the 110th Regiment Motorisé, going from 3 credits to 2 credits, keeping its stats the same, and this is a massive card. This card snowballs so fast. So it's give your units +1/+1 the first time you shuffle your deck each turn, including itself. This guy is a monster. He snowballs very, very quickly. Now, I know it's hard to imagine because of just how mid-shuffle has been and how powerful Legions and Japan Soviet aggro has been to imagine this card being broken, but this is a very dangerous buff. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have made the buff, but it's a very dangerous buff, because this card can get out of hand very, very quickly. And even if it doesn't see necessarily play now, but like if in the future Coleman Rush get more hits, or maybe Japan Soviet or Japan France gets another push, this card could become very problematic very quickly. And I think people are probably underestimating this card a little bit, especially because Dug In is a standard 0 credit shuffle, so you can shuffle for free if you have a Dug In and a Motorise. So essentially you can play like a turn 1 1-drop, turn 2 Motorise, Dug In, and now this is a 3/3 on turn 2, and you also gave +1/+1 to your 1-drop, which probably has 0 op. And now if you can't kill the 3/3 on turn 2, now you're just like, the doors are open for you to pop off for the rest of the game in a way that they're probably never coming back from. It's basically like a mini... It's basically like a mini Thunder Division, with... Yeah, it's essentially just a mini Thunder Division. Insane card. Then we have Carpathian, which, if you watch my card review video for Naval Warfare, you'll know that I laughed about this card for a very long time as to why they're giving Poland such a terrible, terrible card. So it has gone from converted friendly unit into a T-34 76PL, which is the 4/4 2-op heavy armor 1 blitz tank, to a converted friendly unit into the 24th Ulan, which is a 0-op 3/4 3/5 3/6. It's a 0-op unit from the United Front expansion that Poland got, that if a friendly unit isn't destroyed, or if a unit isn't destroyed by the end of the turn, destroy this unit, something like that. Essentially, the important thing is that it has 0-op and blitz, so you're able to use it immediately. And also, the stat line got changed from 5/3 to 4/4, which, again, why this card ever had a 5/3 stat line is beyond me, because it's a guard unit. And actually, now, this card looks decent. Like, look at that, they made this card much better. Is it good? Yeah. But is it decent? Absolutely, it's decent. And, you know, maybe it's worth trying out in, like, some convert decks. Really depends how consistently you can just stick units around on the board, but this is really useful with, as just, like, counters to routed, or route, specifically, because, you know, your opponent's going to route you, they're going to leave routed troops on board, and then you turn... you turn the routed troops into an Ulan and do stuff. And then the Ulan is also being changed from 3/5 Blitz, destroy at the end of your turn unless a unit was destroyed this turn, to 3/4 Blitz. So it's dropping a health, but it's now is dealt 1 damage at the end of your turn unless a unit was destroyed, which is very different. This card is actually almost worth playing by itself. And to get one off of Carpathians is quite useful. So actually, look at that. Poland got 2 good cards out of this balance patch. Like, Carpathians got much better, Ulan got much better. Now, are they going to be playable? Probably not, but, you know, it's going to be worth trying out now. Like, it's easily tier 3, maybe tier 4, rather than, like, it's 100% tier 3, maybe tier 2 is what I meant to say, rather than just definitely tier 4. But yeah, this is a very cool change to see. I'm going to be interested in trying out. Sort of board-centric Polish decks, maybe a convert deck, maybe just running Carpathians in just a general mid-rangey control unit-based deck. And then we get to the reworks, so let's see the reworks. So I did talk a lot about how some really terrible cards are out there. Let's see the reworks, and keep a special eye out for Soviets. So let's start with Oxford. So Oxford is an absolutely abysmal card. Which used to be whenever a ground unit is deployed by either player, set its attack equal to its defense. Now it is when you deploy or add a guard unit, give it +1/+3. This is an absolutely insane text to add to a card. Absolutely insane. If you play turn 2 Oxford, and your opponent can't kill it, and then you play turn 3 Plan West, you just summoned 2 3/5 guards that are now protecting your Oxford in your guard deck. That's crazy. You play turn 2 Oxford, you play turn 3 Desert Dust? Yeah, I think Desert Dust. You now have 2, what is that? 1/6 the garrisons on the board that are now protecting your Oxford. This card is nuts. Now, is this card broken? Yes. Is this card going to break the meta? Probably not, because you can't build a deck entirely around having an elite on turn 2. You just can't. Now, when you have this elite on turn 2, is any deck that plays it going to be like absolutely busted if you spent the bare minimum effort building around it? Yes. I don't like building cards. I don't like designing cards like this. I am strongly against this card design. Because its text is stupidly powerful. It gets better if you play it on curve. And it also snowballs on curve, because the more value you get out of Oxford, the harder it becomes to stop you from getting additional value out of Oxford. This is terrible game design, in my opinion. I hope nobody plays this card. I'm going to be mad every time I get absolutely destroyed by Oxford. Then we have Counter-Strike, which is very simply going from 3 credits to 2 credits. I think this is a very fine change. This is sort of just accepting, 1, it's an elite, so it should be a bit more powerful than non-elite cards, and 2, power creep is a real thing, and this is just sort of addressing power creep that has existed throughout the game, or throughout the years, and I think this is a good change, and, you know, I don't know what US decks are going to exist, but maybe they play Counter-Strike, and that's pretty cool. And then the Wildcat is getting a very weird change, a wild change, if you will. It's going from 3 credits to 2 credits, stayed at 2 op cost, though. It's going from 3 attack to 2 attack, and it is gaining Blitz, and it is gaining add a Brewster, which is the 1/2 has +1 attack in the frontline token unit from the Naval Warfare expansion that US got. Add a Brewster beside this unit when it moves into the front line. So this is a very bizarre card. So, also hilarious power creep for the other Wildcat, which, funnily enough, is also a standard. But there was a 2-credit, 2/3, 2-op neutral card. I don't know why they didn't change that into this, because this had an actually interesting effect. But that questioning aside, it's a very interesting effect. Now, you might be looking at this and being like, okay, well, 4 credits to play this and then push it into the front line, and you get a 2/3 and a 2/2. That sounds bad. Yes, but if you use the area carrier cover, one of the options on carrier cover is move all of your fighters into the front line. So if you move several Wildcats and then maybe some Brewsters all to the front line at once for 1 cost, and then you summon more Brewsters, maybe we're cooking there. But in general, I think this card's really, really bad. I don't see a world where you play this in a air deck. It is just too slow. And yeah, this is just a bad card. And honestly, I appreciate them making a more flavorful card, like pushing the Brewster format a little bit, making, like, it has clear synergies with other cards that exist for the set. Whereas Wildcats, its card text kind of doesn't have a lot of synergy with anything else in US. However, I think the old Wildcat was just a better card. So again, I'm a little sad that they didn't take the actual vanilla unit and turn it into this, and instead took like an actually semi-interesting card and turned it into this, like, on-theme, synergistic pile of trash. But anyways, that is it for the balance patch. So, yeah, these are the only 3 cards that got reworked. We're stuck with 10 cost minority recruits. I don't know why they couldn't have made minority recruits cost like 8, and then people still wouldn't play it, but at least they'd feel like the person who pulls it out of a pack feels slightly worse, or slightly better about themselves. But no, Soviets can't get that at all. I mean, hey, they're pushing US, they're giving Britain more broken stuff, they're giving Japan more broken stuff. Overall, personally, I think it's a mixed bag of a rotation and balance patch. I think the balance patch, in general, did a good job of identifying the issues, with the exception of this and this. Like, if we ignore the first 2 things on this list, this is a great change, this is a good change, this is a good change, this is a good change, and then we look at the buffs, this is fine, this is good, this is a little questionable, this is a little questionable, this is good, this is good, this is absolutely abysmal. This is good. This is fine. So overall, it's a mixed bag, but it's going to change. Even if it doesn't change the top decks in the meta, it's going to change at least the way that they are played. It's going to change the win rates into each other. It's going to change the matchups. There's more to learn and explore after this patch comes out. Even if you don't like it, even if there's things you wish they did differently, there's going to change things, and that is going to feel good. Because myself and many other players just want any change. Now, the rotation, which is going to come out a little bit later, also kind of a weird rotation. I mean, it seems like the cards that are coming back largely don't do anything except for Britain getting Oxford, and Japan getting everything that they ever wanted. And then the cards that are leaving don't really matter outside of the stuff Japan is losing. So it's a little hard to evaluate because Japan is losing everything, but it's also gaining everything, whereas everybody else has stayed the same. But that being said, all of this is also going to come out alongside the 19 new cards of Air Supremacy. So it's a little too early to say exactly how things are going to shake out post-expansion. But again, the balance patch comes out before, and I think the thing that is going to be most clear from the balance patch is I actually think Legions is going to be the best deck for like the 2 or 3 weeks until the patch comes out, because Legions is getting absolutely annihilated by rotation. But if you actually look at the nerfs, just the nerfs, Legions lost Thunder Division, which just doesn't really matter. Like, Thunder Division's slightly capped in how quickly you can snowball with it. It doesn't drastically change the effect of the card. And it gained Sabe Regiment, which just fits immediately into the deck and gives the deck a huge win rate. As well as, Legions was clearly a Tier 1 deck, and all of the other Tier 1 decks got nerfed. Even if not like nerfed into the dirt, but just nerfed a little bit, and Legions really skated by for the balance patch. So I think Legions is probably going to be the best deck in the game for approximately like 3 or 4 weeks before it gets drop kicked by the rotation. But anyways, that is my thoughts. Let me know what you think about the rotation, about the balance patches. Did I miss something? Did I misspeak somewhere? Almost certainly. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know all of that down below in the comments. And join my Discord if you want to continue the discussion over there, talk about other stuff, give me video ideas. Give me video ideas in the comments as well. I can't promise that I'm going to be making a ton more videos until we get into September. But I will certainly be making videos about the new cards as they are revealed. It's only 19, so I might do all of them at once they are all revealed. But, you know, probably going to do another video, maybe a video a week until I can get more time to be doing more videos. But anyways, thank you very much if you made it this far. I know it was a bit rambly at parts, but I wanted to release something. And also, if you see me glancing to my right a lot, that is because I finally got a new second monitor. I was on one monitor for a very long time, got a second monitor, and then the first monitor immediately broke like a month later. So I'm finally back on 2 monitors. So that's why I've been looking over here. I need to get used to it a bit, having OBS on this screen. Well, the stuff that I'm looking at is on this screen. But anyways, that is enough from me. I will leave you all there. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch all of y'all in the next one.